Now, the NDP has this motion. They point out that corporations should pay what they owe. Well, we agree with that. We think they say there should be increased penalties for price fixing. Well, we agree with that too. They think that the Agriculture Committee should study high food prices and whether there is something called greedflation, including by inviting grocery store CEOs to the committee. We agree with that too. That's all very reasonable. Unfortunately, in some ways it doesn't go far enough because they have a very limited view of greed. They think that it only exists in the private sector. They ignore, in this motion, government greed. Right? Government greed. It's almost, they have this fantastical view of human nature. It's actually not, I wouldn't say that it's optimistic or pessimistic. It's both at the same time. They think that a human being is an angel when they work for the state, but a demon when they work in the private sector.
You know, guys, I sort of agree with this, actually. And essentially, all these four large government parties, and this includes what I believe the NDP as well as Liberal, both agree with taking lots of money through the form of taxation from the general public, demonizing private sector workers and corporations, which actually do provide a lot of jobs for the general public. Think of companies like, obviously, GM and Toyota and some of the larger companies, and even the small mom and pop businesses that maybe employ 5 to 10 employees. They are helping society by providing a service or a product, and they are giving the common person jobs for that, in which they earn a living through, and then the state comes and obviously taxes them through that. But I do agree with Pierre here that there seems to be a general sense of that, if the government spends the money and if the government takes that money, that's okay. But it's not okay for smaller companies and organizations to be competitive and to earn a profit, because essentially, from my knowledge, if companies make a profit from their product or services, they're taxed on that. Obviously, you're taxed on the profit. You're not taxed on your expenses and things like that. But the more the company makes, and the more they're taxed, right? So what the government wants to do is they want to take money from companies, and not only just companies, but also from you as individuals. Individuals are actually taxed way more than anyone else in this country, right? If you're an individual and you make, let's say, $100,000 a year, you're going to be paying significantly more taxes than someone who makes less tax than you, and I guess arguably so. Like the general idea around this is that you have more money, more expendable money, therefore you're able to pay more, and that's why we have a graduated tax system. So we have the tax brackets, right, set up that way. But I do agree with Pierre here. So I mean that's pretty interesting. It's okay if the government takes a crap load of money from the general public and spends it on a ton of different things, willy-nilly, and like they've been doing for the past 7 years. But it's not okay, for a smaller company or a smaller less fortunate individuals to keep their own money, right? So that's very, I just think that's very, crazy how the NDP wants big government and more control and more money, right? But let's continue on here with this.
As though greed is a part of human nature only in the free market, but...
There we go. Yeah, exactly. So like the government can raise your taxes, they can take more money from you, so you have less money to spend on groceries, less money to save for your kids' education. So greed is allowed on the government level, but it is not allowed on the private level, right? You're not allowed to keep your money. And yeah, I mean, who's to say that's even being greedy? So you earn $1 and you're arguing that you want to keep more of that dollar. That makes you greedy, but the government wanting to take more of that from you is not greedy. That's essentially what this is. And the people need to really start seeing that for what it is. It's okay for the government to be greedy and to steal and take from you and raise taxes, but it's not okay for you to say anything, contrary to that.
When that's the same person who works for a company then transmits over and works for a bureaucracy or as a politician, all of a sudden they are purified of all greed and transformed into an entirely different being. The reality is that human nature is what it is, for warts and all, good and bad. And the reality is that there is greed, and the greed exists in government as well. When the government expands itself vastly faster than the economy, increasing costs by $500 billion in the last 2 years alone, $200 billion of which had nothing to do whatsoever with COVID. When the government, against the warnings of the Conservatives, gave corporations wage subsidies even though they could afford to pay out dividends to their shareholders and bonuses to their executives, the government was engaging in feeding that greed.
Yeah, and that's true, right? These large organizations and CEOs making multi-million-dollar bonuses is absolute insanity. And then, to add insult to injury, the government will take tax dollars and subsidize these large companies, which are already essentially in a mountain of profit, and they can pay this out, right? So if you think about it in terms of like what's allowed, what's greed. I mean, you made a point there saying how human nature is human nature. It doesn't matter if you're a politician, if you're working in the government, or if you're working in an organization or in the private sector. Greed is greed. But supposedly, according to the NDPs and Liberals, that it's okay to be greedy if you're in the government because you're doing it for the better good. And there's that whole scenario around, steal from Peter to pay Paul. Is that really right? I mean, it is right in some sense, but when in a social welfare type of system that we have, where we want to just spread the wealth around in the way that we are, the government can kind of have free reign on taking as much as they want. I'm not saying taxation is theft, because we do live in a society, a civilized society, where we do require taxes to be, taken in order to have infrastructure, in order to have social programs that are available so people aren't starving and on the street, and even though they still are, and there aren't homeless people, and even though there still are. But now the government has obviously overreaching, as Pierre has said, into other things like the carbon taxes, and then taking that money and then just doing what the hell they want with it, right? And I guess that is why Pierre is the man for the people here. So yeah, I'm just not going to put my personal opinion too much into this, but that's kind of what I'm seeing here. And this is good video, so let's continue on here.
The government printed $400 billion, causing inflation to spiral out of control to the benefit of the super rich, who saw their assets inflate, but to the disadvantage of the poor, who then lost purchasing power.
Absolutely. Think about this, guys. So if you're fresh coming out of school right now and you get a job making $40,000, $50,000 a year, good luck getting a house. And your wage to even reach up to $100,000, $120,000 a year, depending on what field you are, and you might not ever get that high, could take decades. All right, and then and basically what's happening is like, in order to get a mortgage or a property in, like, for example, Toronto or something, we're talking like at least $1 million here, right? I mean, it used to be that $1 million would get you a mansion back in the day. I don't know if any of you guys grew up, but thinking that $1 million would buy you a mansion. Now $1 million would barely buy you a normal house. And essentially, a lot of these people are not ever going to be able to buy property unless they get a huge amount of money somehow through inheritance, or their parents help them out. But working a normal job and then compounding to that student debt, I feel for a lot of the younger generation, because a lot of these people won't ever be able to own a house until these prices of goods and housing and real estate come down. Because, like he said, if you already owned a house when this inflation occurred, your house doubled or tripled in value literally within a few years. And then if you had the house, great, because you could sell that house. You can get or whatever property that is, you can get that overinflated money back, right? And then you can go buy another property. But if you're coming in and you never had a house and you're just saving up your down payment, your 5% down payment, good luck.
And watched house prices go out of reach so that they could never get out of their parents' basements or out of that 400 square foot apartment.
That is a problem. 30-year-olds, 40-year-olds, 50-year-olds living at home with their parents, right? I mean, I don't know about 50-year-olds, but 30-year-olds is definitely a problem, where we're seeing grown men and grown women living at home, unable to pay their own rent unable to get a job that pays enough, or it's just barely enough that they can't even afford food or transportation, or let alone anything else, right? I mean, clothe themselves, right? So we've gotten to a point where society is just on this spiral downward, where we have a whole generation of young individuals in their 20s and 30s that cannot leave their parents' home. They can't leave the parental nest. And that's going to cause a huge societal problem going into the future. And that's just my opinion. But Pierre is onto this, and it's a huge problem that's going to plague society for decades to come, if it ever comes out as a solution, which I can't see that ever happening. It's just it's gotten so bad. But yeah, let's continue on.
It was government greed that had caused that transfer of wealth from the have-nots to the have-yachts. So I just wish once in a while this party, the NDP,
I like that, have-yachts,
which believes in the endless expansion of the state,
exactly,
would
big government,
for just once acknowledge the role that government greed has played in plaguing this country with the highest inflation in 40 years. The cost of government is driving up the cost of living. $500 billion in new inflationary spending has bid up the cost of the goods we buy and the interest we pay. The inflationary taxes have bid up the cost for businesses and farmers to produce those goods.
I don't know about you guys, but I kind of agree with that. I mean, we have a bloated government, and we have a lot of people working in government. I think way too many people working in government, to the point now where obviously a large portion of the workforce is government, and that government is paid for by tax dollars, which then pays the workers, which then obviously pays the tax. I mean, it's a cycle sort of, but I mean, how efficient is that, and how good is that we have a bloated government that continues to expand and needlessly expand at the expense of the private sector, at the expense of the rest of the country. A lot of the government jobs do. I'm not sure. I mean, depending on the sector, obviously, but I do know that they do pay fairly well. If you look at things like, obviously, there's a lot of issues where nurses are not getting paid enough, a fair share, as well as teachers and things like that. But there's a lot of government jobs that are getting paid very, very, very well, including pensions. I mean, not a lot of people have pensions now where they're working at a company for 20 years and 40 years or whatever, and they have a huge, gigantic pension. But a lot of these government jobs seem to have pensions still, and that's a luxury that a lot of the people in the private sector don't have, or simply the employers, the companies, can't afford to give because it's just too much, right? So a lot of people are stuck making their own savings. And we have obviously our own issues with the CBP and EI and things like that. But I just thought I'd point that out.
The more liberals and New Democrats spend, the more things cost. That's how we got into this mess in the first place. But the liberals and the NDP, the costly coalition, want to double down on the problem by further increasing the costs on the backs of Canadians, by tripling the carbon tax, which will inevitably be passed on to consumers. You cannot tax farmers, truckers, and grocers without having those costs passed on to the people.
Exactly, and I don't understand this logic. It's just so boneheaded of the Liberals and NDP to think, or more specifically the Liberals with their carbon tax plan, to think that taxing farmers and fuel and people's ability to heat their homes is going to be good. Because what's going to happen is, you start taxing farmers here. The farmer can't use electric tractors. Come on, give me a break. Technology isn't there yet. You're going to use an electric tractor to plow your field, or electric, a machinery to harvest, wheat and things like that. It's not efficient, and the technology isn't there. And even if it did, you're going to be obviously charging those devices, and that's going to be the power has to come from somewhere, right? Which adds to the carbon emitted into the atmosphere. It's insane because those farmers are now going to have to charge more for their wheat, for their products that they produce. And that's going to pass down to the grocery store. Because obviously, if a grape costs you X number of cents, and then that same grape from the same farm ends up costing, a fraction higher than or double that price or whatever, the grocery store is going to sell that for higher to someone in the store. And as an individual walking down the aisle at your local grocery store, are you going to select the grapes, which cost twice as much, or the ones that cost half as much? Most people are going to pick based off what's going to leave them with more money in their pockets, because the cost of those grapes are going to go up because of the carbon tax, because the farmer has to sell them for more, which is passed down to, it's basic economics. It's passed down into the shoppers, unless the government comes in and subsidizes, which is also then comes from your taxes. Again, it's just a ridiculous cycle where where the government's playing this game where they're stealing from one hand and giving on the other hand, and it doesn't balance out because you obviously end up with less in the end because people are going to buy the grapes that are shipped in from Mexico, which is his point here. If a farmer in Mexico doesn't have these costs because of this carbon tax, and they're going to ship these grapes down through the United States into Canada, for example, it's going to cost way more. Well, it's not going to cost more. It's going to emit more. The carbon emissions from that grape is going to be higher because you're shipping it, you're transporting it all up through the states, all the gasoline that's burnt, all the emissions that's put up into the atmosphere actually increases, and it's less than it's more than that would have been had you but that grape was able to be grown locally within Canada. So the logic doesn't make any sense here, from my opinion. It's just stupidity, and you're like Pierre has says, it's a tax plan they have. It isn't a carbon reduction plan. In fact, the carbon tax hasn't helped reduce the carbon emissions at all, according to Pierre here, and I believe it. I really do believe it.
At the end of the grocery aisle. We know that they will pay those higher prices. We know they already have. Conservatives say enough. The time has come to cap government spending and cut government waste so that we can phase out the inflationary deficits and taxes. Cancel the plan to triple the carbon tax and instead deploy technology to make green alternative energy more affordable. Let's bring down the cost of energy rather than bringing it up. And speaking of which, let's remove the government gatekeepers that make this the 64th ranked country in the world when it comes to getting a building permit. 63 other countries give them faster. What does that mean? It means that farmers can put up their barns faster. It means that mines that would produce lithium, cobalt, copper, and other minerals for green electricity must wait longer and therefore cost more money. It means that producing clean, green, Canadian nuclear, etc., could be coming onto the market faster. Let's get these gatekeepers out of the way, speed up the production, unleash the mighty force of our free enterprise system so that instead of creating cash, we create more of what cash buys, that we unleash the production of a cleaner, more affordable economy for all of our hardworking people. Thank you.
Yeah, and that's it, guys, for that video. So if you like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and click the notification bell. As always, nothing in this video is political advice. It is simply for entertainment purposes only. Thank you.